everyone, it's me, Katie-Beth again, and happy Thanksgiving! So in honor of the holiday, I wanted to share with you my most recent trip, one of my most recent trips, which was to Plymouth Rock. Now, I 100% never thought that I would ever have the opportunity to actually visit Plymouth, Massachusetts, and walk on the shores where the Mayflower pulled up and freaking sired America. And yet, in a way, I really didn't, because the shorelines have changed since then by like a few hundred feet, I think. But I got to walk as close as currently accurately possible to where the Pilgrims did. Stepping off my boat. Doot, 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 doot. Wow, so just thinking about that makes me think of how crazy it is how a year can change everything. Like, before the vid happened in 2020, I really never left Southern California. Now I've got to travel around a ton of places just because it gave me time to not be working 24/7. So I'm actually, in a weird way, really grateful for that. Which unlocks today's achievement, being grateful. Haha, pow, pow, pow. Thanksgiving achievement unlocked. So we all know the story of the first Thanksgiving where the Pilgrims came to America and made friends with the natives and had a great feast celebrating their friendship and how grateful they were to all be living in America together and thriving. Well, that's the story that they basically teach us in elementary school. And now as adults, we all know it's not true. We know it, our teachers know it, our ancestors know it. It's just a fairy tale that America made up, and now we celebrate with overeating. But nonetheless, I was still really surprised that the place that would profit the most from continuing this fairy tale, the town that makes the majority of its income and livelihood off of tourists coming to this area because of that story, I was interested to find out that they don't actually propagate that lie. Like, they don't try to continue the great friendship lie. They actually tell things pretty straight to how they were, well, as far as we know. But speaking of the tourism, they do have some really cool gift shops that still allude to the fake friendship thing a little, but mostly they talk about how hard it was for the Pilgrims to even survive out here, especially that first winter, just in a land that they knew nothing about. And they were obviously making enemies with the natives for the most part. But still, I was still surprised that everyone in the town isn't like, yeah, they were all friends. It's like, yeah, the Pilgrims were horrible to the natives. Just horrible people in general. But they're like humans and still trying to survive. So being that I was in a place with like so much history happening, I think it's really funny that I had another realization that really doesn't have anything to do with Plymouth or Thanksgiving. But the beaches. So I've grown up in Southern California my entire life and really completely taken for granted what beautiful beaches we have. And I didn't even realize why people make California seem like such a big thing with our beautiful beaches and whatnot, because I thought, they have beaches on the East Coast too. But no, I didn't realize what a contrasting difference there are. There's like California beaches, and then there's Plymouth Rock, like where the Pilgrims got off of the boat, and it's super depressing and not beachy. And if they weren't like dying on the boat, I'm sure they would have just been like, get back on, let's go for a different shore. So I didn't realize how lucky I was living in California my entire life with the beaches, the nice beaches, not that far away. So yeah, I kind of get the California golden skies, golden beaches thing now. So, yeah, I guess I'm thankful for that realization now. Another Thanksgiving achievement. Another interesting thing that was presented to my brain out here was that I didn't realize before what a great national symbol Plymouth Rock was. Like, I knew, but I didn't, like, consciously know. It was one of those things, like, someone has to tell you, and then your brain is like, what? Yeah, that makes sense. So, yeah, my noggin already chalked up to like believing that it was a fairy tale, that people got off of the boat and the first place they stepped onto the land was Plymouth Rock, and that's why Plymouth Rock is like the rock itself is such a big thing, because that's supposed to be like where they first stepped out on. At least that's what they teach us in 5th grade American history and what the internet says too. I don't know if that's actually correct, but it's the story we like to believe. But aside from, like, that, the rock itself is still really a national symbol, and I didn't really know why, but, one of the park rangers was actually talking about it, and I was like, oh, that makes sense.
And with the end of the war, the people of the United States are looking for national symbols. Obviously, nothing British will do. What have we thought that's American? The American eagle, yeah! But, you might have heard of Ben Franklin. He doesn't like that idea. He says, eagles, ew, they're scavengers. But one thing they could all agree on at that time, you know that rock up in Massachusetts? It's like us. It broke away from something bigger than itself, and it foreshadowed our victory. And that's how and why Plymouth Rock will be adopted as one of the very first symbols of the United States.
Eagles, ew! I think that was my favorite part of, like, the rock's history, and I'm sure it's a direct quote. But may I say, the rock was a lot tinier than I was expecting it to be, because the stories of them coming out and that's where they're first stepping off into America, I was expecting more of like a plateau, a place with bigger feet holds where like people could stand, but the rock was pretty small. But from what I learned from the park ranger, the rock has been being chipped away a lot. That's chipping, that's like with a chisel chipping. Because people steal parts of the rock for souvenirs. So at first I wanted to be really judgy about these people stealing pieces of a national landmark, but then I remembered some of the, like, weird souvenirs I like to take of, like, oh, I got this rock from Arizona, like, random pieces of, I got this from, kind of thing, so I kind of get it, and I really shouldn't be throwing stones. Because of the glass house I live in. You get it. So on another note, I've recently become really interested in world fairs and all of the monuments and achievements that are built for them and showcased. For example, like the ride It's a Small World from Disneyland. It was designed and built for the 1964 New York State Fair. And a small fact, since it was erected in New York and brought back to California, well, actually originated from California, went to New York and came back. But anyways, they like had to number the back of all the flats so they could put the pieces together in the right way, and you can still see those numbers on the back of the flat if you ever get a chance to go back there, I've heard. Or the Sky Needle in Seattle, Washington, that was one of the main attractions in the 1962 World Fair held in Seattle. And predating both of those state fairs was the 1920 World Fair, which celebrated the 300th year mark of the Pilgrims stepping into America and creating America as we know it now. And as I mentioned before, how the shoreline has changed over the years, part of that, at least part of it, is due from the state fair being hosted there because they had to build up embankments and make everything more visually pleasing, which is actually how the Pilgrim Square Park got founded and built altogether, was so that it could host the 1920s World Fair. And here's a bit more explaining that from the ranger himself.
And Plymouth is, in fact, the oldest continuously occupied English settlement in the United States. And being the first English town in the United States to reach the age of 300 was a big deal to the people here. They wanted to welcome the world to celebrate that, and they wanted to have something like the World Fair. But the site, essentially what was here was a 19th century, mostly abandoned industrial waterfront and a polluted harbor, completely overwhelming a tiny little monument with a rocket. So the Pilgrim Commission was formed. All the land on the waterfront was bought. They demolished all the structures, including the old monument, and then built up all of this artificial terrain to provide the space that would become Pilgrim Memorial Park. The centerpiece of the park, a Greek portico with Plymouth Rock inside it, reflecting its history.
Which is where it still is today. Now, there was a lot of activities that did require money here, like the tiny museum they have, or the Mayflower 2, which you can go, it's an exact replica, and you can go and walk around and check it out, or like the nighttime ghost tours that they have, but I was still on a budget and didn't want to spend a lot of money, so I was really excited to know that they do have a lot of cool free things that you can do there. Like, again, you can walk along the shores where the Pilgrims did. and check out the gift shops and actually look at the rock itself. Like well, it's gated in, but you can walk it up to it and they don't charge you a fee for that, which is pretty cool because since so many other places do charge fees for everything. But what I liked most, other than getting to go up and see the rock itself, were the talks and tours that the park rangers gave, and they were all free, and you can just join right in. And I did see signs that said they were free. I didn't just join another family's tour. But here's one of the really cool tours that I went on. I loved it.
Now these buildings are gift shops, but they're set up to represent the sort of building that people might have been living in 1627. It's assumed that by that time in this area there were people who could build decent houses, and it's assumed that they would have built the kind of houses that they were living in over in England. So these are the kind of housing that they were living on over in England in 1627. Now we have no idea what the housing looked like in 1620 when the Pilgrims arrived. They did arrive in December, so middle of winter. What kind of houses could they build? But we don't have any idea as to what they lived in at that time. Now this is an exact replica of the Mayflower. You've got to keep in mind that the Mayflower was not a special ship. It was just a style, a type of ship. So in the 1950s, when they wanted to make a replica of the Mayflower, all they really had to do was go into the archives and get blueprints and make a replica. It wasn't a difficult thing to do. In the 1950s, over in England, there was a movement to thank the United States for the United States helping England during World War II. And from that movement, they had bake sales and other sort of craft things, and they gathered money together and they built a replica of the Mayflower. It did sail across the Atlantic in 1957, and it's been stationed here since then. So it is an exact replica. People sometimes question about the colors. I don't really have any idea. I would assume that the people doing the research did their research and found out that those colors were on ships at that time. But if you have any other real information, questions about the ship itself, you're better off going over there and asking the people on board the ship. Now you got to keep in mind that it wasn't a passenger ship. There was no such thing as a passenger ship in the 1600s. It was a cargo ship. It had been bringing wine from England and France going across. That was their duty area. The Pilgrims referred to it as a sweet ship. It had never sailed across the Atlantic Ocean before. It wasn't an ocean-going vessel. Now, over in England, as I said, the explorers had claimed all the land for the king. He owned it as far as England was concerned. And he had heard from the explorers and others that there were a lot of fur-bearing animals and there were lots of trees. So he wanted people to go over to this area, chop down the trees, send the lumber back to England, trap the animals, and send the fur back. That's how he was going to make some money out of the deal. He had commissioned a group of men who were going to be able to get other people to go over and settle in the area. They were referred to as merchant adventurers. They were willing to adventure their money. And so what they did is put up notices in England and other areas about the idea of going over and colonizing, the quote, New World. And that's what the Pilgrims came about. They decided they would go on this adventure. Now, they did know a lot about this area. Okay, say that you had a chance to go to the moon. It would be a dangerous journey, but you know an awful lot about the moon. You've seen pictures of the moon, seen videos of the moon. Maybe you've seen those people walk on the moon. Maybe you've touched those moon rocks. So you know an awful lot about the moon. They knew an awful lot about over here. It's just that no European had ever settled over here. These are the first people to come with the intention of settling, of staying, but others had come before them. So that when the passengers got on board, as far as the sailors are concerned, they're the cargo for the journey. They're going to go down below deck, and they're going to stay below deck for the journey. They're not going to get above deck. They'd simply get in the way of the crew with all the loose ropes and sails and that sort of thing. The journey ended up taking 66 days. That's an awful long time to be below deck. You know, there was rough weather. You know, there wasn't any bathrooms, some buckets around. Who knows how often those buckets got emptied, and were there curtains, who really knows? You know, how much privacy they had, probably they didn't have an awful lot of privacy. There were 102 of them. Women, children, men, all down together, all crowded together for 66 days in a very smelly, dirty, filthy area. Everybody going to the bathroom, getting really smelly and dirty. They had a couple of dogs. The dogs are going to the bathroom too. These people are all land lovers. They went through a few storms, so people are probably throwing up every other day. You know, it's a disgusting place, but they had a very good idea as to what they were getting themselves into. Now, originally there were two ships, the Speedwell and the Mayflower. 3 times they left England, and 3 times the Speedwell developed leaks, so they had to return. Eventually they decided to just take the Mayflower. The people on board the Speedwell got on board the Mayflower. That's why there's so many people, 102 passengers and 30 crew. And they left in September, 3 months later than they planned on leaving. What that means is they were living on board the Mayflower for 3 months, eating food that they should have been eating on their way over or when they got here. So when they leave England, they're already low on supplies. And because they left in September, hurricane season, it took them a lot longer to come over. The usual journey would have been about 28 days. It took them 66 days, so over twice as long. What that means is they ate twice as much food. By the time they get anywhere near the New World, they're already running out of food. They're already very low on food. And they are heading for the mouth of the Hudson River. The first land that they see is the tip of the Cape, what we call province towns. Now they had maps, explorers had made maps, they had maps, they knew where they were, they knew they were nowhere near the Hudson River, but they decided it was winter, they were going to settle in this area. While the Mayflower stayed anchored at the tip of the Cape, and the majority of passengers stayed on board the Mayflower, 19 men got into a smaller vessel, you can see it right next to the Mayflower there, and they started to explore the Cape. Now the Cape is basically a big sandbar, so there's no fresh water, there's no place to do farming, and they kept on exploring. They stopped at a number of places along the Cape looking for a good settlement. So when you see the rock, keep in mind, it's not the first rock they ever saw. It's not the first rock they ever touched. It's where they landed when they came to make a settlement. But they had landed at other places. Now in a couple of the other places where they landed, they found some corn that the Native Americans had buried so that they'd have something to eat over the winter months. And they just took that corn. It's on that stolen corn that they lived for the winter months. So the 19 men still exploring came into this area. Now that's a natural peninsula. They opened to the harbors on the left. And they came into this area. This area was a lot different at that time. This was a long, straight, sandy beach with one big boulder, about 3 times the size that it is now. All this land that we walked out on and the land that sticks out on the other side is entirely man-made. The whole park was made in 1920. So it was a long, straight beach, and it only had one big boulder on it. The men headed for the big boulder. Oral history says that they used the rock like a pier, anchored beside it, stepped out onto it. But that is oral history. It was never written down. We do know definitely that that's the area in which they landed. So the 19 men landing in that area, still exploring, 100 yards down, they find a freshwater brook with a lot of cleared land around it. That's basically what they're looking for, fresh water, cleared land for farming. That's why they settled in this area. So the 19 men went back and told the others, and that's when the Mayflower comes into this area. It's too big to come into the harbor, so it anchored out 1.5 miles. That peninsula is 1 mile, so they're anchored out 1/2 mile further than that. And they lived on board the Mayflower for the winter months, basically eating that stolen corn. All right, so just to repeat, this was a long, straight, sandy beach going all the way up to the hillside. It's got one big boulder, which is in that structure, and the boulder was much bigger than what it is now. 100 yards down is a freshwater brook still there, and there are a lot of cleared land around it. Now the Pilgrims thought it was, wow, wonderful, cleared land. But of course the cleared land had been cleared by the Native Americans. This was a Native American village called Pawtucket. The Wampanoags lived here. So it was a Native American village. The Native Americans were farmers, so they're the ones who cleared the field, and it all set up for farming. But it is the middle of winter. The Native Americans are not on the coast in the middle of winter. They're inland hunting. So the Pilgrims don't have anything to do with Native Americans for about 3 months. They're very much on their own. You got to think about it. They're living on board the Mayflower out 1.5 miles. The men are coming in on a daily basis, and they're trying to build what they refer to as houses. But it's kind of hard for me to think of them building houses in the middle of winter. So it's just some kind of shacks or lean-tos that they're putting together. But these men, when they land, have to go about 1/2 mile just to get to the woods. And then they have to chop the trees down, and they have to get that wood to the brook. Now it's the middle of winter. We know there was snow on the ground, so they might have been able to slide the logs along, but that's still an awful lot of work. They're really doing an awful lot of physical labor, chopping trees down, getting the trees to the brook, and then trying to build shelters. They're doing an awful lot of work, and they're not getting an awful lot of food. Basically, they're really starting to wear themselves out. They're overusing their bodies. So what that means is when they get a common cold, like anybody's going to get in the winter months, the flu, anything else, a little bit of pneumonia, but their bodies can't fight it. They don't have the nourishment. Their bodies are just falling apart. So that they start to get sick, their bodies can't fight the sickness, and they start to die. So a lot of men are starting to die. Same thing's basically happening on board the ship. There's a cold wind blowing. It's the middle of winter. People are bound to get sick, but their bodies can't fight the sickness. And once one person gets sick, other people get sick. So over the winter months, people are getting sick. Common cold, flu, some pneumonia. They're getting sick. Their bodies can't fight it. They're dying. On April 6th, the captain decided it was time to take the Mayflower back to England. After all, it was just a rental. They didn't own it. But by April 6th, half the passengers, so 51 of the passengers and half the crew, have died. So it's not like the crew had some extra secret food. They didn't have any more food than the passengers had. People are starting to die. So on April 6th, we've got 51 passengers left. Half the passengers and half the crew. Now the captain said that he would take back to England anybody who wanted to go back. He would take them back for free. Basically, you just pay for a one-way journey. You've just seen half the people you came with die. In some cases, mother and father have died, and we've got a bunch of orphans. In a number of cases, whole families have died. So people have died. Think about it yourself. You've just seen, the person on either side of you is dead. You're not really in that greatest, even though we say 51 survived, it doesn't mean they're in great physical shape. They're still probably sick themselves. So 51. So think about it. If somebody said to you, you've just seen half these people die, I'll get you back to England. England is civilization. This isn't civilization. what do you think you would have done? Would you have gone back with the Mayflower, or would you have stayed in this uncivilized area? Well, all 51 of them decided they would stay. They came here to get a better life. After all, they were getting free land over here. That's why they came. A better life for themselves and for their descendants, and they were willing to suffer to get that better life. So all 51 of them decided they would stay. Do you have any questions now about that first
No hunting during the winter?
Well, the wild animals, like the Native Americans, well, they're not on the coast. There's no wild animals on the coast. So there's, A, there's no hunting, and B, these people are urbanites. They wouldn't know how to hunt if they had to hunt.
All right.
They're not hunters. They're not fishermen. You know, they didn't expect to get here in the middle of winter.
Okay.
They didn't know they were going to be leaving 3 months later than they planned.
The crew came back.
Pardon me?
The crew, no hunting on.
Well, the crew was fishermen and sailors, they're not really hunters.
Okay.
You know, they might have been able to do some fishing, but this does freeze over. It doesn't. We're not talking about a frozen harbor, but the top of it does freeze over.
Okay.
So now on board the Mayflower are females. They're the first females, European females, to come to the New World. Very courageous females. Okay. This is a savage world. It's got savage animals. It's got savage people. The idea over in England and other European places is that European females are not going to be able to exist over here. It's simply too savage for them. So they're very courageous to come over. There were 29 of them, from the very youngest to the oldest, 29 females. That fountain over there is a tribute, a monument to all those 29 females. So we're going to go over there. There's females from the very youngest to the oldest. Their names are on the back of it, so we're going to go back there. It does get a little wet. Now come over this way. The names of the 29 females, from the very youngest to the oldest. And as you can see, some of the first names are missing. Because in those days, women were often referred to by their husband's names, and we really don't know what their first name was. Women in those days were caretakers. That was their main job, take care of people. So while everybody's getting sick, they're the ones taking care of them. What that means is they're getting sick too. Out of the 29 females, 19 were adult women. By April 6th, there were only 6 adult women alive. By what we think of as Thanksgiving, there were only 4 adult females alive. Now there were 50 adult males, 25 survived. There were 33 children, 25 survived. So statistically, more children survived than adults. I would think they were probably given the extra food, covered with the extra blankets. You know, everybody took good care of them because they were really the hope of the future. They were the ones who were going to find the town of Plymouth. Now, Plymouth is the oldest continuously lived in English settlement in America. It's really where America began. Members of the Mayflower Society can trace their ancestry to somebody who came over on board the Mayflower. And it's simply amazing how many people in America can do that. I mean, every day somebody tells me that, there's thousands of people. It's amazing. Okay. It's amazing, man, there weren't that many people on board the Mayflower for so many people to be able to trace their ancestry to it. Now, it's not a pilgrim's home. It's an 18th century sea captain's house. And if they were open, they'd have their their flag out. So I think they're just open on the weekends now at this time. Now, if you look to the left and then to the right, you're looking at the entire park, plus the hillside here. And this was a long, straight, sandy beach coming right up to the base of the hill. So in that structure is the rock. You can see it was right on the beach itself. And it was much bigger than it was now over the winter months, but when the people are dying, they're coming up here to bury their dead. They did it at night. They didn't want the Native Americans to know that they were diminishing in number. So they buried them here at night, and they didn't put down any markers. So we don't know exactly where they're buried. In the 1830s, they were doing some irrigation work, putting down pipes and that sort of thing. And they came across a number of bones, quite a few bones. And they brought those bones to Harvard University and had them examined. And they were European bones, not Native American bones. So it was assumed that they were the bones, some of the bones. You know, wasn't a big dig. They didn't go looking for bones, but they did find some bones of what they figured were the Pilgrims. But think of yourself as one of those 51 who survived. I mean, that's really all you've done. You know, we don't know what kind of shape they were in. But if you're looking out at the harbor, there's the Mayflower heading back to what you think of as civilization. You're very much on your own. You know, do you think one of the Pilgrims might have been saying, "Oh, come on back, I changed my mind"? You know, boy, this is a horrible place. They're on their own. They don't have much food. They don't have very good shelters. They're doing poorly. They made a heck of a big decision. If it hadn't been for the Native Americans, they really would never have survived. And that's the leader of the Native Americans, so we're going to go over it. Was the Sachem, leader of the Pilgrims, not a chief. That's more of a Western term. And Massasoit, you know, as I said, they did have contact with Europeans before the Pilgrims arrived. About 70% of the Native Americans had died from European diseases, so there's not as many of them around in the area as there would have been. So, you know, Massasoit has had contact with Europeans. Some of it was okay contact, some of it wasn't such okay contact. And you know, there were traders who would come and trade a lot of iron to the Native Americans. The Native Americans didn't have iron. In a few situations, the traders would say to the Native Americans that there was better things on board the ship, that if they went out to the ship, they'd be able to get better items. And once the Native Americans got on board the ships, the anchors were raised up and the ships headed back to Europe. The Native Americans were never seen again. So they were taken over to England and other places as specimens of the wild creatures. You know, they weren't thought of human beings, really. They were just creatures. Here's the wild creatures, the savages that live over in that savage world. And so they just disappeared. So Massasoit has seen a number of his people go on board the big ships and never been seen again. Also, though, because they had contact with European traders and others, some of the Native Americans had learned English. You might have heard of Squanto or Somerset. Those are a couple of names that have come down in history, but there might have been others who just their names have not come down, you know, in history at all. So Massasoit does have some interpreters, and he's going to make use of them. Now, when he sees the Mayflower come, he knows it's a European ship. He knows that because it's European, they have weapons of mass destruction. They have cannons, muskets, sheets of armor. The Native Americans don't have any of those things. So he does start to worry as to why the Mayflower is coming into this area. When he sees the Pilgrims come ashore, and he sees women and children, he starts to change his mind. He's never seen European women and children before. These are the first European women and children that come to the New World. And you don't normally bring women and children to a place where you're going to cause trouble or have battles or things like that. So he thinks that they might have come for a different reason, and he's willing to find out. Now that statue, if you just turn around a bit, that statue down there is the guy who was elected governor, Governor Bradford. He kept a journal. That journal was made into a book of Plymouth Plantation. And it's through that journal book that we know about the early days of the Pilgrims. There's nothing else written about those early times. So Massasoit, through his interpreters, meets with Governor Bradford and other Pilgrim leaders, and they come up with a mutual aid agreement It's called the Peace Treaty of 1621, and it lasted for 50 years. That's 50 years. 50 years is a very long time for a peace treaty to last. And basically it's got two parts to it. The first part is that the Native Americans are going to help the Pilgrims, give them food, shelter, show them how to hunt, how to fish, how to farm, and that sort of thing. So they're really taking care of them. The second part says that if the Native Americans in this area are ever attacked, the Pilgrims will help them. So it's a mutual aid agreement, and it lasted for 50 years, an awful long time for a peace treaty to last. Now, if you just step out here a little bit, and if you look down there, you can see that yellow sign, the crosswalk. That's Lyden Street. The Pilgrims called it First Street. It goes along the brook, and it's along that street, Lyden Street, that they built their house. That's where the plantation was, along Lyden Street. And it's assumed that on the fields behind those houses, along the brook, is where the first Thanksgiving took place. Now it really was just a harvest festival. It's happening all over the world. Okay, all over the world they harvest their crops. But if they don't eat them right away, they're gonna salt them, they're gonna bury them, they're gonna taste like crap. So people all over the world are having 3-4 days where they're pigging out, they're eating as much as they can. If they had any animals, they've killed the majority of them because they're not gonna have the grains to feed them. So they got fresh meat. And again, if they don't eat it, it's gonna be salted, be buried, go bad. So people are eating. These are long 3-4 day eating things. Both the Native Americans and the Pilgrims were familiar with the Harvest Festival. It is true, they sat down together, they ate the food together. There were turkeys in the area, wild turkeys, so most likely, turkey was part of the meal, but probably the deers would have been the main course. That would have been the main course. Now, every year along this street, we've got a very long, giant parade. I'm told it's the largest parade outside of New York. And lots of people, we get hundreds of thousands of people coming here watching the parade. It's circled, it's not just here, it goes through the town. But since the 1970s, up on this hill, there's been anti-Thanksgiving demonstrations going on. It's referred to as the National Day of Mourning. And it's really taking place all over America. I've been doing this for 16 years, and this hilltop is filled with people of all different kinds of nationalities and creeds and religions, saying that the idea of the Pilgrims and other Europeans coming here wasn't that great a thing for the Native Americans. They took the Native American lands, they killed a lot of Native Americans, and so it's referred to as the National Day of Mourning. 2 years they brought blood and poured it on the rock. A number of years they brought bags of dirt and they buried the rock. But for the most part, it's a very simplified, peaceful demonstration with a lot of people involved. After a few years, the local authorities decided that these demonstrators had a legitimate point of view, and they put up this plaque commemorating the National Day of Mourning. So it takes place on Thanksgiving Day, basically while the parade's going by, and it's a National Day of Mourning. Now that structure over there is commemorative to all those who died that first winter. The bones that they found when they were doing the irrigation are underneath that monument. On the monument are the names of all those who died that first winter. Now this street does join Lyden Street, so if you wanted, you could walk along here, go down to Lyden Street, and walk in the footprints of the Pilgrims. There's nothing there from the original settlement, but you would be walking in the footprints of the Pilgrim. Lyden is the oldest street in America that's been in continuous use. People have been walking on it since 1620. Now this does end the walking tour. Thanks for coming on it. Hopefully you enjoyed it and got some information. And of course I'll answer any questions that you might have.
So this trip was one of my solo adventures, but I didn't really feel lonely here. The vibe around was really great. It was a lot of buses of elderly people coming to tour it, which I am really excited to do when I get to that age and I can just go check out landmarks and whatnot with friends on buses, because that's what we have to do in our retirement life. I want that already. But back to now. Even going by myself was still really enjoyable, and I feel really grateful that I was able to do that. I really like the idea that I can tell myself that I was there, like I was physically there at Plymouth Rock and saw the area where the Pilgrims stepped off and America started. It just is a really cool thing for my brain to know and have and hold inside of here. But again, so even going by myself, this was a really enjoyable trip. And I'd like to encourage anyone still watching to go on this trip if you can. Just journey this pilgrimage. Yeah, which I guess it really was, because I got on a plane, rented a car, and drove myself all the way out here to go see that silly rock, which is not that grand to look at. But again, it's like the knowledge that you were there. But if you ever get a chance to go and do it, I recommend it. It's fun. Something to keep up here that you actually did. And if you never actually physically get to go out there, I hope you feel like you did maybe from watching this video. Well, as always, thank you for being here with me today, and thank you for sharing on this adventure with me. And thanks for watching. Have a great Thanksgiving, everyone. Oh yeah, and P.S. I'm thankful for all of you. Thank you. Well, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great rest of your day. Thanksgiving Day.